In 1937, a Japanese surgeon made the first incision, clean and deep, into a fully conscious man. No anesthesia, no scream, only the methodical scrape of steel against tissue. The room was cold, smelling of old blood and something metallic. His eyes were wide with a terror that burned past the ability to scream. This wasn't a lone sadist, it was a state-sponsored program. Brilliant doctors systematically dissected living human beings for data. They silenced thousands. Why did an entire nation allow this to happen, and what hidden truth still haunts you about the cost of that silence? To even begin to understand what happened in that room, you need to picture a place that has been surgically removed from most official histories. The Pingfang district, a desolate, windswept stretch of land near the city of Harbin, in the Japanese-occupied territory of Manchuria. The year is 1937, and the Empire of Japan is carving a brutal, expansionist path across Asia, a conflict that history will remember as the Second Sino-Japanese War. It is here, under the direct command of a chillingly ambitious and charismatic microbiologist named General Shiro Ishii, that the Imperial Japanese Army constructs a sprawling, top-secret complex spanning over 6 square kilometers. The facility is a city unto itself, complete with its own power plant, railway siding, and even an airfield. To the outside world, to any who might ask, it is given the benign and bureaucratic title of the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Kwantung Army. But inside its heavily electrified fences and guarded watchtowers, it is known only by its cryptic code name, Unit 731. You must understand, this was never a prison camp in the conventional sense. It was a factory of death, meticulously designed and disguised as a state-of-the-art research facility. Its singular, horrifying purpose was to develop the world's most advanced and devastating biological and chemical weapons. The raw materials for this unprecedented research were not chemicals in sterile vials or bacterial cultures in petri dishes. The raw materials were living human beings, thousands of them. Captured Chinese soldiers, suspected communists, anti-Japanese activists, local peasants, Russian expatriates, Korean civilians, and eventually a number of Allied prisoners of war. Once they passed through the gates of Pingfang, they were systematically stripped of their names, their histories, their families, their very humanity. They were assigned a number and given a new designation, a cold, technical code word used in official reports and casual conversation by the doctors and technicians. They were called maruta. It is the Japanese word for logs, as if they were nothing more than inanimate pieces of wood to be measured, cut, burned, and ultimately discarded when their usefulness was exhausted. If you were to stand outside this facility, you would feel the biting Manchurian wind, so cold it feels like it's cutting directly through your skin, a chilling premonition of the absolute human coldness contained within. This place was designed from its very foundation to be a black hole in history, a place where the normal rules of science, medicine, and morality would not only be bent, but entirely cease to exist. And for a terrifyingly long time, the plan worked with perfect, lethal precision. But what they were doing inside, and how they got away with it, is even more shocking. And this is where the story stops making sense. The work at Unit 731 began each morning with a chillingly mundane and orderly routine, like any other scientific laboratory across the globe. Researchers in crisp white coats would review their daily schedules, calibrate their sophisticated equipment, and file requisitions for the day's materials. But here, preparing a subject meant a guard dragging a man, woman, or sometimes even a child from a squalid holding cell to a laboratory table. Here, a research experiment meant the systematic and imaginative destruction of a human body to see precisely how much it could endure before it finally, mercifully broke. If you had been a junior technician in that building, a witness to the daily proceedings, you would have seen doctors methodically injecting rows of prisoners with plague, with cholera, with typhoid, with anthrax, and then observing their agonizing deaths with detached clinical interest to chart the disease's exact progression. You would have watched them time the fevers with stopwatches, document the rate of internal hemorrhaging, and meticulously note the precise moment the heart stopped beating, all for the sake of creating more effective weapons. This was never random cruelty. Every single act of barbarism was meticulously recorded, catalogued, and filed away for its precious data. In one infamous series of experiments, prisoners were marched outside into the brutal, unforgiving Manchurian winter, where temperatures would plummet to -20, even -40 degrees Celsius. Their bare arms were forcibly submerged in barrels of icy water, held there by guards until they were frozen completely solid. A senior researcher would then strike the frozen limbs with a small wooden baton. Former staff members later testified that they would make the dull, hollow sound of a block of wood being struck. The researchers were studying the pathology of frostbite, testing various experimental thawing methods. Some prisoners had scalding hot water poured directly onto their frozen limbs, while others were simply left in a heated room to thaw naturally, a process that caused unimaginable pain. The result was almost always the same: blackened, rotting flesh sloughing away from the bone, the pervasive, sickly sweet smell of gangrene filling the entire ward. But the true horror of their methods was yet to be revealed. Other experiments were designed to test the absolute limits of the human body under the most extreme physical pressures imaginable. Victims were locked inside massive pressure chambers. The atmospheric pressure slowly and steadily increased until their eyes burst from their sockets and their intestines extruded from their bodies. They field-tested their newly developed weapons by tying prisoners to wooden stakes at varying distances from an exploding bomb. A bomb filled not with shrapnel, but with infectious agents like plague-infested fleas to measure the effective dispersal radius of a biological weapon. The survivors, riddled with ceramic shards and now infected with a deadly disease, were not mercy-killed. They were taken back to the labs for further study and eventual vivisection. And then there were the vivisections, the dark heart of Unit 731's work. Esteemed surgeons, some of them the most respected medical professionals in the Japanese Empire, would perform lengthy, complex operations on living, fully conscious prisoners. They removed organs one by one: stomachs, livers, sections of the intestine, lungs, even the brain, to study the immediate effects of trauma and disease on a living, functioning system. Anesthesia was almost always deliberately withheld. The official justification, written in their own logs, was that the introduction of anesthetic chemicals might interfere with the research results. But the raw animal screams that echoed through the soundproofed halls told a far more primal story. What nobody realized yet was the true extent of their depravity. They would amputate a healthy limb and attempt to crudely reattach it to the opposite side of the body just to observe the process of necrosis. They would inject prisoners with horse blood or other animal blood to observe the violent anaphylactic shock and organ failure that resulted. They would remove a prisoner's stomach entirely and surgically attach the esophagus directly to the intestines, then observe how long the subject could survive. The documented list of procedures is a terrifying descent into absolute scientific depravity, each one more grotesquely inventive than the last. Every single day, more trucks would arrive, delivering fresh maruta to replace the ones who had been used up and incinerated in the facility's massive furnaces. The most conservative official records estimate that at least 3,000 people were killed directly in these experiments inside the Pingfang facility. But the true death toll is unknowable, as tens, perhaps hundreds of thousands more died in the horrific field tests and deliberate plague outbreaks the unit unleashed on Chinese cities. General Ishii would often watch these procedures from a glass-walled observation deck, taking copious notes with the calm detachment of a botanist studying a plant. He saw himself not as a monster, but as a visionary, a patriot serving his emperor by courageously pushing the known boundaries of medical science. The men working under him were not uneducated thugs. They were university-trained doctors, bacteriologists, pathologists, and veterinarians. After a day of dismembering living people, they went home to the comfortable dormitories, to their families who also lived within the compound. They played with their children in the evenings. Here's the detail that would have made your blood run cold if you were there. The terrifying professional silence. The absolute disciplined quiet of the staff as they went about their work, as if they were assembling intricate machinery, not disassembling human beings. This horrifying machine of death ran with relentless efficiency for years, a hidden, blood-fueled engine at the very heart of the Japanese war effort. But in the scorching summer of 1945, as the Soviet army smashed through Manchurian defenses and the Second World War lurched towards its inevitable violent conclusion, the engine began to sputter. The time for research was over. The time for erasing every trace of it had begun. And that's before we get to the part they worked hardest to bury. But there's a detail buried in the record that nobody flagged at the time. On August 9, 1945, the Soviet Union officially declared war on Japan and launched a massive, unstoppable invasion of Manchuria. For General Shiro Ishii and the thousands of staff members at Unit 731, the countdown to annihilation had begun. A frantic, top-secret order came down from the highest levels of the Kwantung Army Command: destroy the facility. Destroy all evidence, leave no trace whatsoever. This scorched earth directive included the final, ultimate betrayal of the remaining maruta. For all the years of their agonizing captivity, they had been kept alive, albeit in constant pain because their living bodies were valuable sources of irreplaceable data. They were assets. Now, in the face of imminent defeat, they were nothing but liabilities, living proof of unimaginable war crimes. The remaining prisoners, several hundred of them, were systematically and efficiently murdered in a final, desperate act of concealment. Some were given poisoned food. Others were herded into their cells where guards pumped in cyanide gas. Those who resisted were simply shot by the guards. Their bodies, along with the bodies of the lab animals, were thrown onto massive pyres, doused with thousands of gallons of gasoline, and set ablaze. The staff worked around the clock in a state of controlled panic, dynamiting the main laboratory buildings, smashing expensive scientific equipment, and feeding thousands upon thousands of pages of research documents and photographs into roaring incinerators. The air for miles around the Pingfang district filled with a thick, greasy black smoke and the unmistakable, sickeningly sweet smell of burning human flesh. Think about the coldest, most transactional relationship you can possibly imagine. Even within that, there is an implicit contract, a set of rules, however twisted they may be. The maruta were objects of study, but their tortured existence was predicated on their value to that study. In that final chaotic week of August 1945, even that grotesque logic was violently abandoned. Their final purpose was not to provide data for science, but to simply become ash, to be scattered by the Manchurian wind. It was the final, absolute confirmation that in the eyes of their captors, they had never been human at all. But this was only the first layer of the cover-up, and what came next was even more brazen. Here's where it gets worse. As the facility burned to the ground behind him, General Ishii gathered his remaining senior staff for a final, chilling address. He ordered them to take the secret to the grave, to never speak of what they had done or seen at Pingfang. He arranged for them to receive small vials of potassium cyanide, instructing them to commit suicide immediately if they were ever in danger of being captured by Allied forces. But you must understand that this was not a panicked, chaotic flight of guilty men. It was a coordinated, strategic dispersal of valuable assets. Ishii and his top scientists were given priority passage on the last trains and planes back to Japan, escaping just hours ahead of the advancing Soviet army. They were explicitly instructed to shed their military identities, to blend back into civilian life, and to simply disappear into the rubble and chaos of post-war Japan. And many of them did exactly that, with astonishing success. They went on to take up prominent, respected positions in Japanese medical schools, in powerful pharmaceutical companies, and within the government's own public health ministries. The man who had perfected the technique of freeze-drying plague bacteria for use in airborne weapons went on to found one of Japan's largest and most successful pharmaceutical companies. Another key researcher became the esteemed head of the Japanese Medical Association. Yet another became the governor of Tokyo. And here is the fact that should make you deeply, profoundly uncomfortable. This was not just a handful of guilty men slipping through the cracks in a broken system. This was the system itself functioning perfectly to protect its own. The Japanese government orchestrated the cover-up from the very top, systematically destroying military records and enforcing a strict nationwide code of silence that would last for more than 40 years. You can almost hear the quiet, celebratory clinking of sake cups in the back rooms of Tokyo as these men toasted their survival, their secrets still safely locked away. They did not live out their lives in fear and shame, looking over their shoulders. They lived them in prosperity, in comfort, and in public respect. The system had not failed them. The system had protected them. In many cases, it had rewarded them for their service. This wasn't a desperate escape from justice. It was a calculated, state-sponsored, and entirely successful evasion of it. But the Japanese government wasn't the only powerful system that would choose to look the other way, to value secrets over human lives. There is one more player in this dark story. You have not heard their name mentioned yet in this context, but you absolutely should have. The United States of America. What you are about to discover is the secret deal they made with General Ishii. The United States military and its intelligence agencies knew exactly who General Shiro Ishii was, and they knew in horrifying detail exactly what he had done. American intelligence officers, already engaged in a frantic race against their new adversary, the Soviet Union, in the nascent paranoid days of the Cold War, tracked him down in occupied Japan in 1946. They now had a monumental choice. They could arrest him and his subordinates, putting them on trial for war crimes of a scale and depravity that almost defied human imagination, or they could quietly make a deal. They chose to make the deal. This decision was not about forgiveness, and it certainly was not born of ignorance. It was a cold, pragmatic, and ruthless calculation. The United States wanted and desperately needed Shiro Ishii's research. The vast trove of data from his human experiments, the precise effects of airborne anthrax on the human lung, the exact lethal dosage of weaponized plague, the detailed pathology of frostbite and gangrene, the autopsy reports of vivisected victims, was considered priceless for America's own burgeoning biological weapons program at Fort Detrick, Maryland. It was a library of forbidden knowledge, data that could never be obtained through ethical research. It had been paid for with the systematic torture and murder of thousands of innocent men, women, and children. And the American government, in the quiet, classified meetings that decided the fate of the post-war world, decided that the price was worth paying, as long as they were not the ones who had to get their hands dirty. But there was one detail buried in the record that nobody flagged at the time. In a series of top-secret interrogations, American officials from the U.S. Army's biological warfare program sat down with Ishii and his top researchers. In exchange for every last piece of their data, the autopsy reports, the grotesque experiment logs, the 8,000 microscope slides showing dissected human tissue ravaged by disease, General Shiro Ishii and every single member of Unit 731 were granted full, complete, and secret immunity from prosecution for war crimes. The official documents, declassified only decades later, are chilling in their sterile, bureaucratic language. They refer to the data gleaned from mass murder as invaluable and of the highest intelligence value. What you now understand, and what most people will never be forced to confront, is that this was never about achieving justice for the dead. It was about securing an advantage for the living. The true, enduring horror of Unit 731 isn't just what happened in the blood-soaked laboratories in Pingfang. It's the stark, terrifying realization that in the great amoral game of nations, certain knowledge is considered more valuable than human life. The system did not break down or fail. It worked exactly as it was designed to. A powerful nation committed unspeakable atrocities to gain a military edge. Another powerful nation then covered up those atrocities to gain that very same edge for itself. The victims of Unit 731 were erased twice. Once when they were turned into logs and incinerated, and a second time when their stories were buried in the classified archives of the victors. This is not a uniquely Japanese or American phenomenon. It is a fundamental, recurring pattern of human behavior at the level of the state. It is the cold, unassailable logic that dictates our national security is worth their immense suffering. It is the logic that whispers that progress sometimes requires sacrifice, and it is always, without fail, someone else who is chosen to be the sacrifice. You can see the echoes of this exact logic today in every shadow debate about national security, in every collateral damage report from a drone strike, in every necessary evil that is committed in the name of the greater good. The machinery of thought that created and protected Unit 731 was not dismantled in August of 1945. It just changed its name, its flag, and its justifications. So now we return, as we must, to the questions that we started this journey with. The answer to the question that you have been sitting with for this entire video is this: how could doctors, men sworn to heal, commit these unspeakable acts? They did it because they were told and they came to believe that their work served a higher, sacred purpose. The divine glory of their nation, the relentless advancement of science, the unquestionable will of their emperor. They were given a powerful system that methodically dehumanized their victims into a subhuman category called logs, and a professional hierarchy that rewarded their monstrous cruelty with scientific prestige and career advancement. They were not alien monsters born of some other species. They were ambitious, intelligent, and patriotic men who followed orders and their own self-interest. A path that a terrifying number of us might also follow under the right pressures and with the right justifications. But the deeper, more disturbing question, how does a system decide that some people are not human, and are you sure that your own has not done the same? The answer to that is far more unsettling because it is so simple. The system does it by creating a category called the other, an enemy, a prisoner, a dissident, a foreigner, an unbeliever, a log. Once that label is successfully applied and widely accepted, any atrocity becomes not only possible, but logically necessary. And as for whether our own systems have made that same calculation, the American government's decision to trade justice for data is the only answer you will ever need. In that secret deal, they saw the scientific data extracted from the logs as more valuable than justice for the human beings who were turned into them. The calculation had already been made. We began this story in a cold room, with a surgeon's steady hands under a bright operating lamp, performing a vivisection on a conscious, terrified man. Those hands did not belong to a madman frothing at the mouth. They belonged to a highly educated, publicly respected professional. The men of Unit 731, the architects of this horror, returned to society and became the heads of hospitals, the deans of prestigious medical schools, the pillars of the very institutions you trust with your own life and the lives of your family today. They were never held accountable. General Shiro Ishii, the mastermind, died of throat cancer in 1959, a free and respected man. The next time you place your absolute faith in a system, be it medical, political, or scientific, remember that all systems are made of people, and people can be convinced that anything is acceptable as long as it is done in the name of the greater good. The real danger is never the monster you can see coming. It's the ordinary, intelligent man in the clean, white coat who has been given permission by a higher authority to do the unthinkable. Tell me in the comments, which part of this stayed with you?